So I was looking at some websites of my coaching colleagues, and I was getting quite curious about the content of their online biographies. You know, those little bio pieces that appear on people's websites? Well, something about them felt a bit odd, and at odds with what I thought coaches got up to. You see, when we're coaching, we're not supposed to be giving of our expertise, even if we've got that expertise. And yet, in these online bios, I'm seeing people reporting on their great experience or tremendous skills and interests within a certain industry or context. So what I'm wondering aloud is, as a coach, do I really need to niche? Hello, and a warm welcome to this podcast on the business of coaching. I'm Hugh Reynolds, Head of Digital at Management Futures, and I thought it would be a great idea to record some informal, insightful and candid conversations with my colleagues and my associates and friends. Now, they're all great practitioners and they've got lots of insightful experience to share, but I really just want to find an excuse to spend more time with them whilst producing discussions that might spark further thinking and debate in our learning community. If you're new to Management Futures and what we get up to, I'll just mention that our work is about enabling leaders, teams, organisations and coaches, and that coaching is always at the very heart of what we do. To niche or not to niche? I know just the man for an exploratory chat about niches, and that's top international coach, Tony Betts. Hello Tony, how are you doing today?
Hey Hugh, pretty good, thank you, man. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks so much for your time on another of these conversations. Really grateful for it.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Hugh. I just hope that whoever listens to these things finds something of interest in them. One never knows quite where to draw the line between a how-to and a general conversation. So hopefully, people will find our general exploration of the topic of some interest, at least, man.
I'm sure they will, Tony, but even if they don't, I really enjoy it. So that's what matters sometimes.
Good to hear that.
To kick off the conversation, I gave Tony a rough idea of what I think niching is all about. Positioning yourself and your coaching services within a particular context or industry. Is that what we mean by niche? Is that what you mean by niche coaching, Tony? If you're coaching within a particular industry or a particular context, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a good place to start, Hugh. I think just clarify what we mean when we're having a discussion about niche. Where do you put yourself? Niche, obviously, being in a literal, literal meaning a corner, a place where you sell your services or where you choose to be seen as somebody who has some expertise. On that basis, yes, it's an interesting one, really, because I don't think that it needs to be a question of either or. Does one choose a niche or not choose a niche? And I suppose that by way of introduction, it's probably a good idea to think about what one's purpose is in coaching. And by purpose in this context, I would say, are you adding coaching to other skills that you have? Do you already have a reputation and you want to just add coaching to it? Or are you somebody employed by a big organization in a training capacity and you want to add coaching to it? Or are you a bit of a freelancer like myself who goes out and markets one's abilities to the best of your ability to the widest possible audience that you feel would derive some benefit from a conversation with you? So yeah, I guess does that help in terms of figuring out what, for the sake of today, what is a niche as opposed to a generalist?
Absolutely, Tony. I think if I could reflect back on what I've heard there's a lot about yourself as coach or your own context. And I guess that's one of the points that I'm curious about is how much we say about ourselves and our understanding, perhaps, and where that takes us as a coach. Because as I observed in a coaching approach, it doesn't really matter who I am or what my context is, does it?
Ideally, I suppose it doesn't matter what your background is in a purist sense. Certainly, if one understands and applies the fundamentals of coaching, it really shouldn't make a difference as to what your own background is. But in reality, there are certainly clients who seem to feel a degree of pre-connection, if you like, or confidence that perhaps somebody understands their territory or their working environment or the broader influences in their life. And I think that definitely can give a person a reason to at least have a conversation with you initially out of a cast. How do you get chosen out of a cast of thousands?
Mm,
It's kind of wear the same uniform, really, or something, whatever it is.
yeah. So there's a kind of assurance given to the client and maybe even to the coach that this relationship exists within a sort of common field or a common context. So you understand where each other is coming from. Is that good for the coachee?
That that's yes, that's a very important point, Hugh, because one could argue it either way, and I'm pretty sure that any experienced coach will have a view on this. And the thing is this: that if if you're able to contain your enthusiasm or your need or your willingness to jump in and be the person who sparkles as a coach or fixes the client's problems. If you're tempted towards that and you are then using industry knowledge or industry expertise, then there's a hell of a big danger, I find, and I've personally experienced this even quite recently, where you would tend to be asking questions to formulate a conclusion. You might have an idea. The client has said something about their industry or their situation which resonates with something that you may have experienced. And of course, with every good intention of trying to be helpful, it's a real red flag that you could end up steering the conversation towards something that makes you feel productive or makes the conversation feel productive, which is not always what the client wants to talk about or is indeed where the real answers lie.
Mm. That's really fascinating, Tony. That it's, if I can put it in these terms, it's almost as if you've got to stop yourself from going in and rescuing or going in and providing that information. And maybe if you have got that industry experience or that particular sector or contextual knowledge, is there any sort of I don't want to call it willful blindness because it's sort of that's got very negative connotations, but some kind of useful ignorance or useful forgetting that's going on here within the
Useful
coach?
forgetting. I like that phrase. I haven't heard that. Useful forgetting. That's a nice way of putting it, Hugh. Good one, man. Um, I think there is, like most things, the first step in overcoming any habit or behavior that you want to change is you've got to become aware of it. And so, as you've just said, becoming aware that you might have a tendency to try and to pull too much on your knowledge or to try to steer the conversation towards areas where you feel that you have some competence or some valid input. If you're aware of that, then you can guard against it. So, but it's in itself that's a little bit tricky because let's say somebody has seen the fact. Now, if I may just talk on personal experience here, um, the my background's advertising marketing. I was an advertising writer, and I had a PR company, and I spent a lot of time helping small and medium-sized businesses to launch products and so on. So I'm constantly in that kind of mode, and people would maybe see that in my bio. And they would think, oh, great, that's what I want. Now, immediately, you are now, mm, you're in difficult, slightly potentially difficult territory, because if that person is speaking to you specifically because they would value your experience in advertising or marketing, and you withhold that any information by being too purist in one's questioning techniques, then I think that, mm, that, well, I hesitate to say the word that you might be shortchanging the client, but I think that you can end up with disappointed clients. So you've got to tread that road very consciously.
So giving a client what they thought they wanted might only be a good thing if it really is what they need.
Well said, indeed. Yeah. And I think in our previous session, we touched on this point of it, contracting. In other words, if you give input specifically based on your knowledge, your prior knowledge, your industry knowledge, at least flag it up as such and say, well, if you're asking a personal opinion or an opinion based on my experience, it would be potentially this, but you're not me, and your situation is different. So if we throw that into the mix as just another opinion, what will you do with that? What will you extract from that? And so it's, yeah, a bit of recontracting there. I think softens the potential for moving into advisor mode that may make you feel good, but
Sure.
doesn't necessarily do a great deal for the long-term relationship.
So as a coach, I need to be aware of that and aware of what I might bring into that conversation, and reflect on my tendencies perhaps as a person to
Yeah.
go in and say too much or that kind of thing. And I really love the way there, Tony, that you told people about another podcast that we've made about contracting. So do, if you've got time, go off, listeners, and listen to that one at your leisure. But hi, how's it going so far? You're listening to a podcast on the business of coaching from Management Futures. I'm Hugh Reynolds, and my conversational partner is top international coach and consultant, Tony Betts. Tony and I are in the middle of a chat about the ins and outs, the pros and cons of niche coaching, positioning yourself and your coaching services within a particular context or industry. Thanks for listening in. Bringing it back around to niches, Tony, when I'm choosing a coach, I'm looking for somebody. Oh, yeah, they've got industry experience. Yeah, they're sort of from my tribe, or they've got some weight behind them. So I might go with that. So there's a sort of decision made around our shared understanding of each other's background, perhaps, or that kind of thing. But then within the coaching room, is it about us understanding that person, free from their context, or understanding that person in an individual way rather than in a contextual way?
I think it is definitely, Hugh. I mean, it brings up this question of is the coaching transformational, transactional, and that again is again referring back to what's the contract, what's the expectation of the client, what do they need here, and in shorter interventions where it might be quite transactional, and a client is looking for example, they're dashing into a meeting with other senior people. The previous meeting didn't go well, and they need a quick conversation with you, the coach, as to how they might deal with a difficult person, or get the attention of the room. Then you're talking about technique, you're sharing techniques, you're talking about very technical side of things, and it's a quick transactional exchange which suits that person in that particular moment.
Hmm.
Later, in the follow-up with that client, you might well say, how did it go? And you might start to explore with them how they actually feel when they go into these conversations, or when somebody confronts them or asks them a difficult question. Uh, what's the internal reaction that they're having? When did they first notice those kind of reactions? And in what situations does it come up? Talking about their very particular internal ecology. So it may well be then that you're moving into more transformational coaching, where the goal is to help the coachee to understand themselves in situations, rather than just talking about the situation itself, you know.
Hmm. So to just highlight that contrast, there's a point about us understanding the person's needs in the moment or on the day, or the particular goal that they want to work to, or something like that. We've kind of got to get our heads around that. But then you've actually taken it into a third step, really. I'm always searching for this structure, Tony. Sorry, I know it's not always helpful, but this third level, on my it's back of an envelope, a sort of structure to our conversation might be the person has got to understand the person. It's not so much about us, but about what they're discovering about themselves, perhaps.
Precisely, yeah, that's it exactly, Hugh. In my opinion, that our role as coaches is to help a person to understand themselves, how they react in certain situations, what they might do differently within their personality type, within still being authentic, and so on, and getting ourselves out of the way so that we can have these wide array of tools that we might share with a client, but they've got to feel it's the right one. They're the ones who've got to take that information and apply it. I mean, realistically, if you look at the time that we spend with people, what is it, 10 hours, 12 hours, typically, in total, out of a working life of thousands and thousands of hours. So the idea of it being something that is not a one-off tool, it's not like just a quick fix, but actually giving people insights into where they developed those particular habits and beliefs, and how they may adapt and change them. Clearly, to me, is where the real gold dust and the real reward, and actually the real privilege and great responsibility. And I don't say that lightly. I believe there is a great responsibility when people entrust you with that side, if you like, of themselves. So,
Absolutely, and I think trust, I'm sure, will come up in other conversations that we have around this Tony, and that sort of bond between the coach and the coachee. I wonder if I could, for the last part of our conversation, turn it in on you, really, Tony. Make it a bit personal, man, if you don't mind, because I've got in front of me your bio, okay, and I don't know how niche it is. People will be able to look this up online, I'm sure, but I don't know about how niche it is, and I don't know whether when you wrote this bio, or your people wrote it for you, whether you were thinking about particular sectors or particular areas that you wanted to sell your services into.
excellent point, Hugh. Well spotted, man. Yeah. And I think this is useful to, if we may, in answering that particular point. I wonder if I might include within that the generally how coaches, or especially new coaches, market themselves. And this question often comes up with coaches who are just starting out, or ones who are hoping to make it more of their career. I believe, based on my own experience, that actually to have a point of difference in a sea of coaches, and I mean there are thousands of coaches around these days. To have a point of difference, I believe, is a useful marketing tool. Uh, but to say, does one need to have a point of difference, depends very much on where you are starting out. And I'll get back to my own personal bio in a while. But um, if, for example, what I noticed when it was 25 odd years ago when we first started, yeah, when first got involved in coaching, and it was quite a rarity in those days. It was known. It was primarily, I think, primarily promoted across in the States, and not too many people had heard of executive coaching. Then, as it began to gain in popularity, what one found was that quite a number of people who were often involved in the HR function of big organizations saw this opportunity, and they thought, why the goodness are we paying an external coach to come in and do that? It's not that difficult. Let me set up shop and do it myself. And so, of course, that's meant then you have this category of people who then leave the organization ostensibly and come back in and become a supplier of training and or coaching. So they are based on their knowledge of maybe a big organization, and so that's where they found themselves, and that's their niche. That's where they get their initial marketing from. Um, Other people, and I include myself in this, where one doesn't have any particular organization that you know, I looked around and I thought, well, what do I know about? And after years in advertising and marketing, as I mentioned, which is very much a generalist, you need to know a little bit about an awful lot of different industries and things to be able to write advertising for them. And so I looked around and I thought, well, what's the common denominator there? So I came up with this idea. I also, by the way, was a teacher of an Eastern martial art called Aikido. And in that, I came up with this concept called the art of not doing, which meant that one became as effective as possible with your energies by being very focused on the outcome that you want and not wasting energy in terms of doing things that are not in keeping with your goal. So, in that respect, I had a niche. So, when I went out to market myself and as a new person around, not knowing that many people, I had a point of difference which I had chosen because it was an area that I felt very comfortable in, and I was able to make a promise, which was how to be more effective with less effort. Now, in those terms, I believe that niche marketing helped open doors for me, which then later led to relationships with different organizations. And I was seen as that person who does the art of not doing, for example. So that specialist approach definitely can help with marketing.
Yeah, and I can hear there how you're differentiating yourself on the back of things that you know, things that you do, like your passions for martial arts and your experience there. And it's I was just thinking as you were talking about standing out from the crowd. We're not talking about getting a funny hat or having some sort of gimmick. We're actually using things that are part of us. Yeah, we want to be authentic coaches. So you're using parts of yourself, parts of your experience to create that unique identity. And I have to say, and I do, people will have to look it up themselves online, but we'll put some links around this podcast wherever we place it. But look at your bio. Um, would you tentatively make any final other suggestions for new people starting out? Things to include or things maybe not to include in their bio if they've got that task of writing one this week.
May I preempt that uh, with just the suggestion that in all marketing, the idea is to find out what the market wants And the more you can realize what people want and how to solve their problems, that is the way to pitch your services as an answer to their problems. Um, the the fact that I pitched myself, I created a product based on what I knew. It was quite fortuitous that it happened to be a product that was of interest to some people at that time, and that was a launchpad. Uh, I I would say today that understanding what is it that people are looking for, what are the problems that they are facing, if are they in business, whether you're doing business coaching, is it about leadership, or is it about teams, is it about performance, is it about whatever it's about, that's where you need to pitch your bio. As so it's not about going out and saying, these are all the reasons why I'm wonderful and you need to buy me. That doesn't work in my opinion. I wouldn't say, well, if it does work, it's very exceptional that it works. Whereas contacting somebody whom you know is having to reach targets in terms of diversity, or whatever, in terms of whatever their particular problem that they face, and then you come along with some expertise in that particular area, that is how to niche yourself. So it's the niching is a response to the marketplace, not a I'm I'm wonderful, buy me.
Yeah. And it sounds adaptive. It reminds me of evolutionary niches where an organism is adapted to a particular environment or part of an ecosystem or something like that. So I'm going to hit you with a big question, Tony. I know you're used to this, and I know it's completely unfair because we're almost out of time. But I'm interested how often you update your bio. So if your niche is changing or you see another opportunity, sort of what drives that? Do you on what frequency do you refresh your bio and refresh what you're saying about your niche?
Pretty much the same as if I was applying for a job. You know, it's really I'm I mean there are a couple of generic bios floating around, but specifically when the client asks me, could you submit your bio, I ask them, what's the task, what's the job, ask the usual kind of coaching style questions, and then I'll create the intro and pick out the relevant parts of the experience to be quite bespoke and specific. Again, the client has a problem, I have the solution, and my bio should by and large reflect that.
I love that idea, Tony. It strikes me that it's giving the components there that people can put together what they want. Yeah, out of your experience, out of those different niche elements, perhaps something else is constructed, or they construct the Tony that
Yeah.
is going to come and work with them as a coach. I really respond to that idea. Tony, I'm sorry that we are sort of out of time, but I just want to thank you so much for having another of these conversations. I found it thoroughly useful and practical, whilst at the same time sort of being mindful. I was trying to think of a title for this podcast, and I was thinking, to niche or not to niche, as you mentioned there, but it's not really been that. Well, I don't think we've come down on any side as whether to niche, have we?
We haven't. In my view, I think they coexist side by side. There are times when you niche, especially when you're marketing yourself to unknown or to people in general, and there are times when you are a responsive generalist who's listening carefully to what the problems are and what the client wants, and responding and shaping oneself accordingly.
Thank you, Tony. That's a great point to end on. And thanks for sharing this time with me. I'm going off to do some niching now, and when it's appropriate. And good luck with your own.
Thanks very much, Hugh. And again, thank you, man, for the opportunity to share these ideas. I know our conversation probably weaves around, and generally I enjoy your questions, and we we don't prepare a script for these things, and they're not intended as a definitive training module or anything like that. But if it gets people to think and question and give things just a bit more of a lift under the cover to see really what's behind things, then we've achieved, I think, everything that we want.
Definitely, Tony. And you mentioned cover there. I think of it as a rich tapestry that we're weaving together here to to wrap around
Great,
ourselves
Hugh.
and our community. Cheers, man. Take it easy. See you soon.
All the best, Hugh. Thank you very much. Bye now. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much to Tony Betts for all his time and thoughts on this topic. This isn't the final word on niche coaching or anything else. It's just a chat we felt you might like to listen in on, but we do really hope you got something from our discussion. Do check us out and what we're up to. Online we live at managementfutures.co.uk. I'm Hugh Reynolds with the privilege of producing digital projects, and I'd love to hear from you if you'd like to suggest topics for future conversations around coaching, teams, high performance, inclusion, or any other shared interest. Take care.